I'm Mike Crosby. I'm the founder and CEO of Veterans Prostate Cancer Awareness. We formed VPCa in 2017. And really, our mission is very simple. It's to provide education and awareness resources for veterans. We're trying to raise awareness around prostate cancer. As we all know, the VA now is probably the largest integrated healthcare system. There's 19 million vets in the country. About 6.5 million are receiving care at the VA. Right now, there's a study that was finished in 2020 that showed about 500,000 veterans with prostate cancer in the VA, 16,000 metastatic cases, and most importantly, 14% of those diagnosed are metastatic on their first diagnosis, which is a big issue. The general population SEER data is about 7%. It tells us a lot, probably that we weren't screening well enough in the beginning, but now we're hopefully catching up and trying to change some of those things, which we're going to talk about tonight. And it's great to have everybody here, and thanks for your participation. Let's just jump right in. For a couple of years, we worked pretty hard in Washington, D.C. to try to push some legislation that's called, it was initially called the Veterans Prostate Cancer Treatment and Research Act. And as politics go and our making of bills happened late last year in the omnibus bill, it was actually injected into that bill. And it passed. So it is now part of law. And what we're finding now is that we're trying to promote that it's out there. There's a lot of issues that are inside that law. And really, I want to start with you, Doctor, and ask you, what are your thoughts? If you've read it, and if you haven't, what are your thoughts about trying to standardize this care, which is really what it's intended to do, is to help standardize the care for prostate cancer patients in the VA?
Yeah, I think it's a great initial thing that's been done. I don't know all the details about it yet, but I have to still read through that. I think standardizing prostate cancer, especially for our vets, is very important. I think that this is an understaged population. We're not doing enough. And I feel like each hospital system, each visit should set up subcommittees to look over their own population and see how they can best suit their patients.
That's great. Dr. Henley?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, it's really was so impressive when I took a look at the bill was just to see the attention that was paid to the prostate cancer population, because I think having it in writing, having it sort of codified into this law, into this bill, just signifies how big of a challenge and big of a problem this is, and sort of calls all of our attention to the need to solve all the various challenges in this patient population. I think a lot of it was clinical components and pieces that many of us are familiar with in the care of veterans with prostate cancer. And so it kind of helped further support the efforts we're working on. Speaking in the standardized care pathways kind of piece of it, I think what's really interesting about that is, as Amr was kind of alluding to, each VA ends up being pretty different in how they might approach problems, depending on their location, depending on their resources, et cetera. And so I think seeing some standard components that VAs can kind of follow to allow them to ensure that veterans are receiving consistent care across the board is really meaningful. So.
Appreciate that. Dr. Swanky, I was going to ask you about, they're supposed to be developing metrics to measure the implementation, and not just the implementation of this bill or the standards, but also measure our performance as healthcare providers, as a healthcare system. I mean, this is a big system. And I personally feel, and I think our organization feels, that if we can actually come together around just one disease state and actually do it right and structure it correctly, it can serve as a template, not only for other disease states, but also into the community, right? So I think we have an opportunity if we all get together and do that. But what is this metrics? What are we going to measure when we start doing these things?
Well, I think it's an important point. I think these types of initiatives are always with great intention, but unless you have metrics to follow them and ensure that they're being met, I think there's a pitfall to that. So within the VA, particularly in the oncology service line, there's a lot of interest in trying to develop these types of metrics. So there's definitely metrics within the oncology group. Within radiation oncology, actually, the national office has a particular interest in developing quality measures. So one of our main goals as part of the national office is to develop this radiation oncology quality surveillance system. And what this is the goal is to make sure that every veteran, whether they receive care in the VA or outside of the VA, gets the best quality care when it comes to their cancer treatment. In this case, specifically radiation oncology. And we've developed robust measures in collaboration with ASTRO, the American Society for Radiation Oncology, with the goal being that these are consensus-based measures that should be delivered to veterans, and have developed an infrastructure. One of the strengths of the VA is that there's an integrated healthcare system. And, the benefit of that is that allows the ability to, at scale, be able to collect data, ideally passively, on what type of care is actually being provided to veterans. And so we're working on developing this infrastructure to be able to collect that data and be able to give immediate feedback to clinicians on how to, what they're doing well and what they could work on to help give even better care.
That's great. Is your office, or is the national office, is it sharing any of those across all of the other national offices? Do you know?
I think that there's regular meetings between the different national offices, and I know that Dr. Kelly, who's our fearless leader, has done a wonderful job of collaborating with other service lines to help learn from other services as well as show what's worked for us to other services.
That's great.
Mhm.
The legislation also calls out some specific issues around research. So that gets us into clinical trials and how do we better push clinical trials, or whatever we want to call them, drugs or treatment developments. So, Alicia, I'm very interested in, what your thoughts are from managing these clinical trials. How do we better educate veterans on the benefits of participating in clinical trials?
Communication and awareness, and making sure they're educated on the elements of the clinical trial and what it entails and what it means to them in their specific circumstance. And just make sure that they're committed to following the protocol. That's very important. Sometimes not fully understanding the protocol leads to pushback later on down the line because they're not, I guess, or not, it's not that they're not, but sometimes they just haven't fully understood what's expected of them.
Yeah.
So, communication, transparency, because I think trust is very important. Developing trust and facilitating that and the rapport that comes with that, it goes a long way.
I'll tell you from experience and just help our own education efforts that a lot of veterans or a lot of patients are scared away by the word trial, right? I wish you could find another title for these studies or whatever, because they put themselves in the category of thinking they're a guinea pig, right? And they're not. I mean, these aren't blind trials. Very rarely do you have that. You have crossover arms, all sorts of things in there. And I think those things need to be explained up front to patients. And we find that, really, I agree with you, that communication and really some very pointed education on the importance of these, and that you're actually helping, develop something and helping others with the same disease by participation.
Sure. And just kind of adding to that with the communication, it has to be in terms that they understand, because communicating on a level that they don't understand is really not effective communication. And even that alone can deter them from wanting to participate if they're not really understanding to the level of their understanding what's expected.
That's great. Do you, when you're making materials or making things for or developing educational materials, are you satisfied with what's being produced on those things? Or do you think, from the VA's perspective, I mean, we're talking inside the VA here, could the VA do a better job of providing, basic educational materials?
Well, for one, we're mandated by, or on what we can even give them by the IRB. So that's one practice that we have to follow. There's always room for improvement. Even within our own clinical trial, we're always finding ways to better reach the veteran. Even just simplifying certain things or making it more easily accessible to them. So yes, there's always room for improvement, but again, we have to stay in line with what we're able to do with regard to IRB regulations.
That's great.
Mhm.
So Kathy, to you, I wanted to ask about, there's all these guidelines that are out there, right? We have AUA guidelines, ASCO guidelines, we've got Astro, I think, has some out there, and now the VA is developing its own pathway, which is really as a guideline. I mean, we'll call it a guideline. When you're seeing patients go through this, is there any, first of all, what do you think about, there's discrepancies in all those guidelines. There's little nuances in all of them that are a little bit different.
Right.
Our position, we think that they all ought to be the same thing. It's the same disease. You're doing the same treatment. So why aren't these guidelines together? I think I know the answer, but we don't like that answer. So I'm over to you about what is your feeling about that?
From my perspective, I rely on the team, the multidisciplinary team, to take the guidance and interpret it and then go from there with what they think would be best for the patient.
And as this new clinical pathway is developed, right, that is being done, I know Dr. Slanky's on the committee and we're being invited to be on the committee as well as a part of the patient aspect of that thing. I'm not sure, and maybe you can ask or answer, how much is the committee following existing guidelines? I mean, they're out there. Why are we reinventing the wheel? And are there so many differences in VA care versus community care or care out in the community that we should be trying to develop our own rice bowl there?
Well, I think that it's impossible to create a guideline that is comprehensive for every clinical scenario encountered by a patient, any patient or clinician. And I think that every guideline has its strengths and weaknesses and has areas where it gives very kind of diverse, I should say the full spectrum of what's needed in guidance for that guideline, and some places where there could be a little bit more specific guidance. And so I think having all of these resources available allows you to take the best from all these different guidelines. I do think that there are specific considerations within a VA population that we need to tailor the guidelines such that they give the best possible care possible to our veterans.